The first gunshot shattered the tranquility of Eleanor Keller's morning like a stone through glass. Before she could fully register what was happening, her beloved cabin, the one she had painstakingly built with her own hands over the past 2 years, was engulfed in flames, orange tongues licking at the weathered timber walls that had sheltered her through 2 harsh Montana winters. It was 1878, and at 24 years old, Eleanor had learned that the western frontier offered both freedom and danger in equal measure. The daughter of a Boston schoolteacher, she had come west after her father's death, determined to claim her own piece of the untamed land that promised new beginnings. Her neighbors had been skeptical of a woman living alone, but Eleanor's fierce independence and skill with both a plow and a rifle had eventually earned their grudging respect. But not everyone's respect, apparently. "Get out here, Keller!" a gruff voice called from outside. "This is just a warning. Next time, you might not be so lucky." Eleanor grabbed her rifle and a small leather pouch containing her father's pocket watch and her mother's cameo, the only valuables she possessed, and slipped out the back door just as the roof began to collapse. Hiding behind a stand of pines, she watched as 3 riders circled her burning home, their faces obscured by bandanas. She recognized them anyway, the Hargrove brothers, who had been pressuring her to sell her land for months. They were working for the railroad, she knew, trying to secure the path for the new line coming through the territory. "You think she made it out?" the youngest Hargrove asked, his voice carrying on the morning air. "Don't matter," the eldest replied. "Message is sent. No woman's stubborn enough to rebuild out here alone." Eleanor bit back a sob as she watched the flames consume everything she'd worked for. The Hargroves eventually rode away, satisfied with their morning's destruction. She waited until she was certain they were gone before emerging from her hiding place, her heart breaking as she surveyed the smoldering ruins. She had just fallen to her knees in despair when the sound of approaching hoofbeats made her raise her rifle once more. "Whoa there!" a deep voice called out. "I'm not looking for trouble." The man who rode into the clearing was tall and broad-shouldered, with sun-bronzed skin and eyes the color of a summer sky. He wore the practical clothes of a working cowboy, worn denim, a faded blue shirt, and a Stetson pulled low over his brow. He reined his horse to a stop at a respectful distance, taking in the scene with a grave expression. "Madam, I saw the smoke from across the valley," he said, dismounting slowly. "Name's Gabriel West. I run cattle about 10 miles south of here." He gestured toward the still smoking ruins. "Hargroves." Eleanor lowered her rifle slightly but didn't fully relax. "How did you know?" "They've been causing trouble all over the county," Gabriel replied. "Burning out folks who won't sell to the railroad." He took off his hat, revealing thick dark hair streaked with gold from the sun. "I'm mighty sorry about your home." Eleanor felt the tears she'd been holding back begin to fall. 2 years of work, everything I owned. Gabriel surveyed the destruction, his jaw tightening. Then he looked at Eleanor, really looked at her, taking in her soot-streaked face and the determined set of her shoulders despite her obvious distress. "They burned your cabin down," he said simply, then with unexpected gentleness, added, "We'll build another." Eleanor stared at him, wondering if she'd heard correctly. "We?" Gabriel nodded. "I've got extra hands at my ranch who can help. Won't take but a few weeks to get you under a roof again." He paused. "That is, if you're staying." "Of course I'm staying," Eleanor said fiercely. "This is my land. I'm not letting those bastards, pardon my language, drive me away." A slow smile spread across Gabriel's face, revealing a dimple in his left cheek. "Didn't think you were the type to run. Just wanted to be sure before I offered my help." "Why would you help me?" Eleanor asked suspiciously. "You don't even know me." "I know enough," Gabriel said. "I know the Hargroves are bullies working for greedy men, and I know that anyone who's managed to homestead out here alone for 2 years has more than earned the right to stay." He extended his hand. Besides, my ma raised me to help neighbors in need. Eleanor hesitated, then took his offered hand. His grip was firm and warm, his calluses matching her own. I can't pay you, she warned. Gabriel shook his head. Not asking for payment, just being neighborly. He glanced at the sky. It'll be dark soon. You got somewhere to stay tonight? Eleanor looked around at the smoking ruins of her home and felt a fresh wave of despair. I suppose I could make camp. Nonsense, Gabriel interrupted. My sister's place is about an hour's ride from here. She's got a spare room and would welcome the company. When Eleanor started to protest, he added, just until we can get you sorted. Clara would never forgive me if I left a woman to sleep rough when there was a proper bed available. Too exhausted and heartsick to argue, Eleanor nodded. Thank you, Mr. West. Gabriel, he corrected, helping her gather what few belongings had survived the fire. Anyone who's about to help me take on the Hargrove brothers and the railroad has earned the right to use my given name. As they rode away from the smoldering remains of her home, Eleanor cast one last look over her shoulder. The ache in her chest was almost unbearable, but alongside it bloomed something unexpected, the first tender shoots of hope. She had no way of knowing then that the fire that had destroyed her home would be the same fire that would forge the strongest bond of her life. Clara West's home was a modest but comfortable two-room cabin situated on a gentle rise overlooking a creek. It was well tended, with curtains in the windows and a small garden out front, signs of a woman who had made a real home in this rugged country. Eleanor immediately felt both relief and a pang of loss as they approached. This was what her own cabin had been becoming, before the Hargroves had reduced it to ashes. Gabriel's sister proved to be as kind as her brother had promised. Clara was a widow in her early 30s with a no-nonsense manner and quick smile. She took one look at Eleanor's soot-streaked face and tear-reddened eyes and ushered her inside without a barrage of questions. You'll stay as long as you need, Clara declared, setting a bowl of stew in front of Eleanor. Any woman brave enough to homestead alone deserves help when trouble comes. Eleanor felt tears threatening again. It's very kind of you, but I don't want to impose. Nonsense, Clara interrupted. Winter's coming and you need a roof over your head. Besides, she added with a gentle smile, it gets lonely out here sometimes. I'd welcome the company. While the women talked, Gabriel stepped outside to tend to the horses. Through the window, Eleanor watched his tall figure moving efficiently in the fading light. There was something reassuring about his presence, a steady strength that made her feel the world wasn't entirely hostile. My brother's a good man, Clara said, following Eleanor's gaze. Too good for his own well-being sometimes. Eleanor turned back to her hostess. He mentioned you both have a ranch south of my place? Clara nodded. Gabe runs the cattle operation. I moved here after my husband died 2 years back. Couldn't stand to stay in our place with all the memories, but couldn't bear to leave the territory either. She gestured around the cabin. Gabe built this for me. Said a woman needs her own home, not just a room in a bunkhouse full of cowhands. That was kind of him, Eleanor said softly. That's Gabe, Clara replied with obvious affection. Always taking care of everyone else. She gave Eleanor a thoughtful look. You know, I haven't seen him this fired up about something in a long while. The Hargroves burning you out really got under his skin. Before Eleanor could respond, Gabriel returned. I've sent one of your hands to the ranch to let the boys know I'll be staying here tonight, he told Clara. If it's all right with you, I'd like to escort Miss Keller back to her property tomorrow morning to see what can be salvaged. Eleanor, she corrected him with a small smile. If I'm to call you Gabriel, you should use my given name as well. Something flickered in his eyes, surprise, perhaps, or pleasure. Eleanor, he repeated, and the way he said it made it sound like something precious. That night, Lying in Clara's spare bed, Eleanor found herself replaying the events of the day. She had lost everything she owned, been driven from her home by threats and violence, and yet somehow didn't feel entirely bereft. The kindness of strangers or neighbors, as Gabriel had called them, had provided a counterweight to the cruelty of the Hargroves. And then there was Gabriel himself. Eleanor had met plenty of men since coming west, some decent, others not so much, but none had affected her quite the way he did. There was something about his quiet confidence, his straightforward manner of speaking, and the way he'd simply stated, "We'll build another," without hesitation, that had cut through her despair. She told herself it was merely gratitude she was feeling. After all, what woman wouldn't be grateful to a man who offered help when she'd lost everything? But as she drifted towards sleep, Eleanor couldn't help wondering if it might be something more. The morning brought a clear sky and renewed determination. After a hearty breakfast, Eleanor and Gabriel rode back to her property. In the harsh light of day, the destruction was even more apparent. The cabin was nothing but a blackened skeleton, and most of her possessions were beyond recovery. "They were thorough," Gabriel said grimly as they surveyed the damage. Eleanor nodded, swallowing hard. "They wanted to make sure I had nothing left." She walked through the ruins, nudging aside charred timbers with the toe of her boot. Miraculously, her cast iron skillet had survived, though the wooden handle was gone. She picked it up, cradling it like a treasure. "That's a start," Gabriel said, nodding at the skillet. "What else can we salvage?" They spent the morning sifting through the ashes, recovering what little remained unburned: some metal tools, a few ceramic dishes, the hardware from her furniture. It wasn't much, but Eleanor felt better having something, anything, to begin again with. Gabriel walked the perimeter of the clearing, assessing the land with a practiced eye. "You've got good timber on your north acreage," he observed. "We can harvest logs from there for the new cabin, and the spring's still flowing strong." He turned to her. "You've got a good piece of land here, Eleanor. I can see why you fought to keep it." "It's not just land," she replied, gazing out at the vista before them, rolling hills covered in pines, with mountains rising in the distance. "It's freedom, a chance to make my own way, answer to no one but myself." She gave him a sidelong glance. "I suppose that sounds foolish to you." "Not at all," Gabriel said quietly. "It's why most of us came west, to build something that belongs to us and no one else." He rubbed his jaw thoughtfully. "The difference is, most men don't have to fight quite so hard for the right to try." Eleanor was surprised by his understanding. Most men she'd encountered couldn't fathom why a woman would choose such a life, especially alone. "The Hargroves will be back," she said, voicing her greatest fear. "Once they see I'm rebuilding." Gabriel's expression hardened. "Let them come. They'll find it's not so easy to intimidate someone who's not alone." He gestured toward the burned cabin. "I meant what I said yesterday. We'll build you a new home, sturdier than the last. And if they come back, they'll have to deal with more than just one woman with a rifle." Eleanor felt a rush of gratitude, but also wariness. "I appreciate your help, Gabriel, truly, but I don't want anyone else getting hurt on my account." "Standing up to bullies is everyone's business," Gabriel said firmly. "The Hargroves have been pushing folks around for too long, thinking their railroad connections make them untouchable." He stepped closer, his blue eyes intense. "Besides, I've got my own reasons for wanting to see them taken down a peg." "What reasons?" Eleanor asked. Gabriel hesitated, then sighed. 3 years ago, they tried the same tactics on a friend of mine. Old man Jenkins wouldn't sell his place because it had been in his family for generations. They burned his barn, threatened worse if he didn't sign over his land. His voice grew rough with emotion. Jenkins was 70 years old, and his heart couldn't take the stress. He died a week later. Railroad got his land anyway. Bought it from his city relatives for a fraction of what it was worth. Eleanor's heart ached for the old man she'd never met, and for the obvious pain Gabriel still carried over his friend's fate. "I'm sorry," she said softly. Gabriel nodded, his expression grim. "So you see, this isn't just about your cabin. It's about making sure what happened to Jenkins doesn't happen to anyone else." He met her eyes. "You're just the first person stubborn enough to stand and fight instead of running." "I've never been good at running," Eleanor admitted. That earned her a ghost of a smile. "I noticed." Gabriel looked up at the position of the sun. "We should head back to Clara's. Tomorrow, I'll bring some of my hands and we'll start clearing the site for your new cabin." As they rode back, Eleanor found herself studying Gabriel's profile, struck by the complexity of the man beside her. He wasn't just helping her out of kindness or neighborly duty, he was fighting his own battle against the injustice that had claimed his friend. She wondered what other layers there were to Gabriel West, and was surprised by how much she wanted to discover them all. True to his word, Gabriel arrived early the next morning with 4 ranch hands and a wagon loaded with tools. Clara came too, bringing food for the workers and additional supplies for Eleanor. "Men can build walls," Clara said as she helped Eleanor sort through the donated clothing and household items she'd brought. "But they always forget the things that make a house a home." The men set to work clearing the burned remains of the old cabin, while Eleanor and Clara established a temporary camp nearby. By midday, the site was cleared and Gabriel had staked out the foundation for the new structure larger than Eleanor's original cabin, with room for a proper bedroom and a larger kitchen. "This is too much," Eleanor protested when she saw the layout. "I don't need anything so grand." Gabriel wiped sweat from his brow. "You're going to be stuck inside for the winter in a few months. You'll thank me for the extra space when the snow's 6 feet deep." One of the ranch hands, a young man named Tom, laughed. "Boss always builds big. You should see the bunkhouse he put up for us hands last year. Practically a palace compared to what other outfits provide." "My men work hard," Gabriel said simply. "They deserve decent quarters." He turned to Eleanor. "And you deserve a home that will last, especially after what you've been through." The work continued steadily over the next few days. Gabriel and his men felled trees, trimmed them into logs, and began constructing the walls of Eleanor's new cabin. Eleanor worked alongside them, determined to contribute to her own home's rebirth. Though she lacked the men's strength, she was skilled with tools and familiar with construction from building her original cabin. Gabriel seemed impressed by her capabilities, never suggesting she leave the men's work to him and his hands. Instead, he showed her more efficient techniques and listened when she offered suggestions about the layout or construction. In the evenings, they would all return to Clara's place, tired but satisfied with the day's progress. After dinner, while the ranch hands bedded down in Clara's barn, Gabriel often sat with Eleanor and Clara on the porch, talking as the stars emerged in the vast Montana sky. Eleanor found herself looking forward to these quiet evenings. Gabriel was well read for a cattleman, able to discuss everything from current politics to literature. He told stories of his childhood in Pennsylvania, his journey west after the war, and his gradual building of the ranch he now owned. "What about your family?" Eleanor asked one evening, about a week after they'd begun construction on her cabin. "Besides Clara, are your parents still in Pennsylvania?" A shadow crossed Gabriel's face. "Our parents died when I was 19, Clara 17. Influenza. I'd already headed west by then, looking for opportunity. Clara was engaged to her Thomas, so she stayed behind." He looked out at the darkening landscape. "I sent for her after her husband died. Thought she shouldn't be alone." "You take care of people," Eleanor observed. "It's in your nature." Gabriel shrugged, clearly uncomfortable with the observation. "Just doing what's right. Nothing special about that." "Plenty of people know what's right but don't bother doing it," Eleanor countered. That makes it special indeed. Clara, who had been listening to their conversation with interest, stood up with a poorly concealed smile. Well, I'm exhausted. Think I'll turn in early. She gave Eleanor a meaningful look before disappearing inside. Left alone on the porch, Eleanor was suddenly aware of Gabriel's presence in a way she hadn't been before. He sat just a few feet away, his profile outlined against the last purple light of the fading day. The silence between them was charged with something new and unfamiliar. "And what about you?" Gabriel finally asked, his voice low. "What brought you all the way from Boston to homestead alone in Montana territory?" Eleanor considered the question. Few people had asked about her reasons. Most were too busy telling her she was foolish to try homesteading as a woman alone. "My father was a teacher," she began. "A good one, with progressive ideas about education, including education for women. He taught me everything he taught his male students, and more besides." She smiled at the memory. "He used to say that a mind wasn't male or female, just hungry or satisfied." "Sounds like a wise man," Gabriel commented. "He was," Eleanor agreed. "When he died, I found myself with no family, reasonable education but few prospects in Boston society. Women of my background were expected to marry or become governesses or companions." She shook her head. "None of those options appealed to me. So you came west instead," Gabriel supplied, "to claim your own piece of the world." "Yes," Eleanor said simply. "I wanted to build something that was entirely mine, to succeed or fail on my own merits." She gave a bitter laugh. "Though I suppose the Hargroves have made their opinion on my merits quite clear." Gabriel turned to face her fully, his expression intense in the gathering darkness. "The Hargroves are small men who can only feel big by making others small. Their opinion isn't worth a damn." The vehemence in his voice surprised her. "Thank you," she said softly. "Don't thank me for speaking the truth," Gabriel replied. He hesitated, then added, "You know, watching you these past days, your determination, your skill, the way you've faced this setback, I've rarely been more impressed by anyone, man or woman." Eleanor felt heat rise to her cheeks, grateful for the darkness that hid her blush. "Now you're just being kind." "I'm being honest," Gabriel insisted. He stood up abruptly. "I should let you get some rest. Early start tomorrow." Eleanor rose as well, oddly disappointed that their conversation was ending. "Good night, Gabriel." He paused at the steps, turning back to her. "Eleanor," he began, then seemed to think better of whatever he'd been about to say. "Sleep well," he said instead, and disappeared into the night. Eleanor remained on the porch for a long time after he'd gone, trying to make sense of the confusing emotions stirring within her. She'd come west to be independent, to need no one but herself. Yet in just over a week, Gabriel West had become important to her in ways she hadn't anticipated. His help with rebuilding her cabin was invaluable, of course, but it was more than that. She found herself looking for him throughout the day, pleased when he approved of her work, disappointed when he was occupied elsewhere. This wasn't part of her plan, this awareness of a man who was only being neighborly. And yet, as she finally went inside to bed, Eleanor couldn't help wondering if perhaps her plan had been too narrow, too focused on independence to the exclusion of all else. Maybe, just maybe, there was room in her vision of freedom for someone she hadn't expected. The new cabin took shape rapidly over the next 2 weeks. Gabriel and his men worked tirelessly, and Eleanor matched their dedication. The walls rose steadily, the roof went on, and windows, actual glass windows that Gabriel had somehow procured from the nearest town, were installed. "It's magnificent," Eleanor said one evening as they stood together, admiring the nearly completed structure. The cabin was indeed larger than her original home, sturdy and well-crafted, with a covered porch across the front and a proper stone chimney. It still needs work, Gabriel said critically. The interior walls need to be chinked, the floor laid, furniture built. Even so, Eleanor insisted, it's already more than I ever expected to have again. She turned to face him directly. I don't know how I can ever repay you for this, Gabriel. He shook his head. I'm not looking for repayment. Then why? The question had been burning in her mind for weeks. Why go to all this trouble for someone you barely knew? Gabriel was silent for a long moment, his eyes on the cabin rather than on her. When I first came west, he finally said, I had nothing but the clothes on my back and a half-broken horse. Old man Jenkins, the friend I told you about, he took me in, gave me work, taught me ranching. He took a deep breath. When I had enough saved, he helped me buy my first piece of land, even loaned me some of his cattle to start my herd. He turned to Eleanor, his eyes intense in the fading light. I asked him once why he'd helped me, a stranger with no experience and nothing to offer. Know what he said? He didn't wait for her answer. The West breaks a man who stands alone. We survive by standing together. Eleanor felt her throat tighten with emotion. That's beautiful. It's true, Gabriel said simply. I couldn't help Jenkins when he needed it. I was away driving cattle to market when the Hargroves came for him. His voice roughened. But I can help you, and maybe in doing that I'm honoring what he did for me. Without thinking, Eleanor reached out and took his hand. I think he would be proud of you. Gabriel looked down at their joined hands, then slowly raised his eyes to meet hers. Something passed between them in that moment, an acknowledgement that whatever was happening between them had moved beyond mere neighborly assistance. The moment was broken by a shout from one of the ranch hands, calling Gabriel over to consult on some aspect of the construction. He squeezed her hand once before releasing it, leaving Eleanor with the lingering warmth of his touch and the certainty that things had shifted irrevocably between them. That certainty was confirmed the next morning when Eleanor arrived at the building site to find Gabriel deep in conversation with Sheriff Thomas Morgan, a grizzled veteran of the frontier who served as the county's sole lawman. Miss Keller, the sheriff greeted her with a tip of his hat. Mr. West here's been telling me about your trouble with the Hargroves. Eleanor shot Gabriel a questioning look. They hadn't discussed involving the law. Sheriff Morgan's an old friend, Gabriel explained. I thought he should know what's happening out here. Not much I can do officially, Morgan admitted. Burning someone out is a serious crime, but without witnesses willing to testify. He shrugged. Still, I wanted you to know I'm keeping an eye on the situation. The Hargroves have been causing trouble all over the county, and sooner or later, they'll make a mistake I can act on. Thank you, Sheriff, Eleanor said, though she wasn't entirely convinced the law would be much help out here, where distances were vast and enforcement sparse. After Morgan left, Eleanor confronted Gabriel. You should have discussed this with me before involving the sheriff. You're right, Gabriel conceded. I should have. But Morgan's a good man, and having him aware of the situation can't hurt. He hesitated. The cabin's almost done. Once it is, my men and I will have to get back to the ranch. There's work that can't be put off any longer. Eleanor felt a pang of disappointment, though she'd known all along that Gabriel's help was temporary. Of course, you've already done far more than I could have asked. I want you to consider something, Gabriel said carefully. The Hargroves aren't likely to just accept defeat. They might come back, especially once they see you've rebuilt. I know that, Eleanor replied, lifting her chin. I'm prepared to defend what's mine. I don't doubt your courage, Gabriel said, but there are 3 of them, and they won't hesitate to use force. He took a deep breath. I'd like to assign one of my hands to stay here with you, at least for a while. Tom's a good shot and level-headed in a crisis. Eleanor bristled at the suggestion. I don't need a protector, Gabriel. I've been taking care of myself for years. This isn't about your capability, Gabriel insisted. It's about numbers. One person alone, no matter how capable, is vulnerable. Two people watching each other's backs have a much better chance. His voice softened. Please, Eleanor. If not for your sake, then for my peace of mind. She wanted to refuse, to insist she could manage on her own as she always had. But there was genuine concern in Gabriel's eyes, and pragmatism eventually won out over pride. Very well, she conceded. But just until we're sure the Hargroves have moved on to easier targets. Gabriel's relief was evident. Thank you. I promise Tom won't be in your way. He can sleep in the lean-to we built for storing tools. Eleanor nodded, then changed the subject, unwilling to dwell on what Gabriel's impending departure might mean for the growing connection between them. The floor's nearly done. I was thinking we could move my things from Clara's tomorrow. Maybe even sleep here tomorrow night. That's the plan, Gabriel agreed, following her lead. Clara's sending over some extra bedding and supplies in the morning. They worked side by side for the rest of the day, finishing the floor and beginning to build simple furniture, a table, benches, a bed frame. Eleanor was acutely aware of Gabriel's presence beside her. The careful way he guided her hands when showing her a new technique, the brush of his shoulder against hers as they worked. Each contact seemed charged with significance, yet neither of them acknowledged the growing tension between them. By sunset, the cabin was essentially complete. It would need more furnishings and finishing touches, but it was habitable, a sturdy shelter against the approaching winter and whatever threats might come before then. As they stood admiring their work in the golden light of evening, Eleanor felt a complicated mix of emotions: pride in what they'd accomplished, gratitude for Gabriel's help, and a deep sadness at the thought of his imminent departure. It's a good cabin, Gabriel said, satisfaction evident in his voice. It'll serve you well. Thanks to you, Eleanor replied softly. Gabriel turned to her, his expression serious. I didn't do it alone. We built it together, Eleanor. The emphasis he placed on together sent a shiver through her. They stood facing each other in the lengthening shadows, so close she could see the flecks of darker blue in his eyes. Gabriel, she began, not entirely sure what she wanted to say, only knowing that something needed to be said before the moment passed. She never got to finish her thought. A gunshot cracked through the evening stillness, the bullet splintering the doorframe inches from where they stood. Get down, Gabriel shouted, pulling Eleanor to the ground and covering her body with his as more shots followed in quick succession. Keller, a voice shouted from the trees. This is your last warning. Clear out by morning or we finish what we started. Eleanor recognized Harlan Hargrove's voice. Gabriel did too, his body tensing above hers. The rifle, Eleanor whispered urgently. It's inside, by the door. Gabriel nodded, calculating the distance. Stay down, he ordered, then rolled toward the cabin door, keeping low. A bullet kicked up dirt near his hand, but he made it inside. Seconds later, he was returning fire, forcing the Hargroves to take cover. The ranch hands, who had been preparing to leave for the day, came running at the sound of gunfire, their own weapons drawn. They took up positions around the cabin, adding their fire to Gabriel's. Eleanor, Gabriel called from inside. Can you make it in here? She assessed the distance, about 10 feet of open ground between her current position and the cabin door. Taking a deep breath, she ran for it, bullets whizzing past her. Gabriel's arm shot out as she reached the door, pulling her inside to safety. Are you hit? He demanded, his hands moving over her shoulders, checking for injuries. No, Eleanor gasped, her heart pounding. I'm fine. You? Fine, Gabriel confirmed, though his voice was tight with anger. Those bastards were aiming to kill. The exchange of gunfire continued for several more minutes before abruptly ceasing. Through the window, they saw 3 riders retreating into the trees. "They're running!" Tom called from his position outside. Gabriel moved cautiously to the door, rifle ready. "Everyone all right?" he called to his men. A chorus of affirmatives came back. The Hargrove's attack had been vicious but ineffective. No one was hurt, and the cabin had sustained only minor damage from the bullets. Once he was certain the danger had passed, Gabriel turned to Eleanor, his face grave. "This changes things," he said quietly. "They've escalated from property destruction to attempted murder." Eleanor nodded, still trembling slightly from the close call. "They won't stop, will they?" "Not unless they're forced to," Gabriel agreed. He paced the small confines of the cabin, thinking, "I need to get you somewhere safe tonight. Tomorrow we'll talk to Sheriff Morgan again." "I'm not leaving," Eleanor said firmly. "If I run now, they win. This is my home, Gabriel. I won't be driven from it." Gabriel looked like he wanted to argue, but something in her expression stopped him. Instead, he nodded slowly. "Then we stay and defend it. Together." He called to one of his hands. "Ride to the ranch and bring back more men. And send someone to alert the sheriff about what happened here." As his men carried out his orders, Gabriel turned back to Eleanor. "I won't leave you alone tonight. The Hargroves might come back with reinforcements of their own." Eleanor knew she should object, insist that she could handle herself. But the truth was, she didn't want to be alone, not just because of the danger, but because the thought of Gabriel leaving, even temporarily, had become increasingly painful. "Thank you," she said simply. The rest of the evening passed in tense vigilance. Gabriel's hands set up a perimeter around the cabin, taking turns on watch. Inside, Eleanor and Gabriel prepared a simple meal from the supplies they had on hand, talking little but acutely aware of each other's presence in the small space. As night deepened, the practical question of sleeping arrangements arose. The cabin had only one bed, hastily assembled that very day. "I'll keep watch from the porch," Gabriel offered, avoiding her eyes. "Don't be ridiculous," Eleanor countered. "You need rest as much as I do. The floor is perfectly adequate for one night." Gabriel looked like he might argue, but then simply nodded. "As you wish." Eleanor found spare blankets and made a pallet for Gabriel near the hearth, where a small fire warded off the autumn chill. Then she retreated to her own bed behind a hastily hung blanket that served as a privacy screen. Sleep, however, proved elusive. Every creak and rustle from outside had her tensing, wondering if the Hargroves had returned. And beyond the fear was an acute awareness of Gabriel's presence just a few feet away, so close, yet separated by more than just a blanket partition. "Gabriel," she whispered into the darkness. "Are you awake?" "Yes," came his immediate reply, confirming her suspicion that he too was finding sleep impossible. "I never properly thanked you," she said softly. "Not just for the cabin, but for staying today. You could have been killed." She heard him shift on his makeshift bed. "I could say the same to you. Most people would have given up after the first cabin was destroyed." "I'm not most people," Eleanor replied. "No," Gabriel agreed, his voice warm even in the darkness. "You certainly are not." Silence fell between them again, but it was a different kind of silence, now expectant rather than awkward. "Eleanor," Gabriel finally said, his voice low and serious, "there's something I need to tell you." Her heart quickened. "Yes." She heard him take a deep breath. "These past weeks, working alongside you, getting to know you, it's changed things for me. Changed me." He paused. "I came here to help a neighbor in need, but somewhere along the way, you became much more than that to me." Eleanor held her breath, afraid to break the spell of his words. "I know your independence is important to you," Gabriel continued, "and I would never want to compromise that. But I need you to know that my feelings for you have grown into something I never expected. Another pause. I think I'm falling in love with you, Eleanor Keller. The words hung in the air between them, transforming the small cabin with their power. Eleanor lay perfectly still, her heart pounding so loudly she was sure he must hear it. Gabriel, she finally managed, her voice barely above a whisper. Would you come here? There was a moment of hesitation, then the sound of movement as Gabriel rose from his pallet. He appeared at the edge of her blanket partition, a tall silhouette in the dim light from the banked fire. Are you sure? He asked, his voice rough with emotion. In answer, Eleanor extended her hand to him. He took it, allowing her to draw him down beside her on the narrow bed. They lay facing each other, close enough that she could feel the warmth of his breath. I came west to be independent, Eleanor said softly, to build a life that was entirely my own. I never expected to find someone who would understand that, who wouldn't try to change it. She reached up to touch his face, tracing the strong line of his jaw. But you do understand, don't you? I do, Gabriel affirmed. Your strength, your determination, they're part of what draws me to you. Eleanor smiled in the darkness. When I saw my cabin burning, I thought I'd lost everything. I never imagined that same fire would lead me to something far more valuable. She drew a shaky breath. I think I'm falling in love with you too, Gabriel West. He gathered her close then, his arms strong and sure around her. When his lips found hers in the darkness, it felt like coming home, a different kind of home than she'd ever known, but one just as real and solid as the cabin walls around them. Their kiss deepened, tentative at first, then growing in passion as the barriers between them fell away. In the shadow of violence and destruction, they found a connection that promised something neither had been looking for, but both desperately needed a love that strengthened rather than diminished their individual spirits. Later, as they lay together in the quiet darkness, Gabriel's arms still around her, Eleanor marveled at how quickly life could change. 3 weeks ago, she had been alone, her home destroyed, her future uncertain. Now, she had a new cabin, stronger than before, and a man beside her who saw her true self and valued it. What happens tomorrow? She asked softly, her head resting on Gabriel's chest. Tomorrow we face the Hargroves, he replied, his voice rumbling beneath her ear. Together, and after that, he pressed a kiss to her hair. After that, we have all the time in the world to figure out what comes next. Eleanor smiled, content with that answer. Whatever came next, she wouldn't face it alone. And somehow, that knowledge didn't feel like a compromise of her independence but an enhancement of it, a partnership of equals, each stronger for the other's presence. Outside, the night grew quiet, the only sounds the gentle crackling of the fire and their synchronized breathing. In a cabin built by shared labor and determination, Eleanor and Gabriel slept peacefully, unaware that the next day would bring both danger and decisions that would shape the rest of their lives. Morning arrived with golden light filtering through the cabin's new windows. Eleanor woke to find Gabriel already up, stoking the fire and preparing coffee. He turned when he heard her stir, his face breaking into a warm smile that made her heart skip. "Good morning," he said softly, crossing to sit beside her on the edge of the bed. He brushed a strand of hair from her face, his touch gentle. "Sleep well. Better than I have in weeks," Eleanor admitted, reaching up to touch his face, reassuring herself that the previous night wasn't just a dream. Gabriel caught her hand and pressed a kiss to her palm. "We should talk about what happens next," he said, his expression growing serious. "The Hargroves won't give up easily." Eleanor nodded, sitting up and reaching for her robe. "I know, but neither will we." They discussed their options over breakfast, weighing the risks and possibilities. Gabriel's men had returned in the night with reinforcements from his ranch, and the cabin was now well protected. But they couldn't maintain such a defense indefinitely. "Sheriff Morgan's our best hope for a permanent solution," Gabriel said, refilling their coffee cups. "If he can bring charges against the Hargroves, it might be enough to make the railroad distance themselves. Without that backing, the Hargroves are just bullies." "And if that doesn't work?" Eleanor asked pragmatically. Gabriel's expression hardened. "Then we find another way." "I won't let them drive you from your home, Eleanor." A knock at the door interrupted their conversation. One of Gabriel's ranch hands, a young man named David, entered after Gabriel's acknowledgement. "Boss, Ryder's coming. Looks like the sheriff, and he's got company." Gabriel and Eleanor exchanged a look before heading outside. Sheriff Morgan was indeed approaching, accompanied by 3 other men. To Eleanor's surprise, one of them was wearing the expensive suit and derby hat of an Eastern businessman. "West," Morgan greeted as they reined to a stop. "Miss Keller. Glad to see you both in one piece. Your man reached me last night with news of the shooting." "Sheriff," Gabriel acknowledged. "What brings you out here with company?" Morgan gestured to the well-dressed man beside him. "This is Mr. Philip Whitaker from the railroad company. Seems news of the Hargroves' activities has reached some important ears back east." Whitaker dismounted, looking uncomfortable in the rugged surroundings. "Miss Keller, Mr. West. I represent the board of directors for the Northern Pacific Railroad. I've been sent to investigate some concerning reports about tactics being employed by local agents." Eleanor exchanged a skeptical glance with Gabriel. "You mean the Hargroves burning people out of their homes and shooting at them when that doesn't work?" she asked bluntly. Whitaker had the grace to look embarrassed. "Such actions, if they occurred as described, are absolutely against company policy. We contract with local agents to secure right-of-way, but only through legal, fair negotiations." He cleared his throat. "The board was most distressed to learn that the Hargroves have been using our name to justify criminal behavior." "Distressed enough to do something about it?" Gabriel pressed, his stance protective beside Eleanor. "Yes, indeed," Whitaker confirmed. "I've already terminated our relationship with the Hargroves, and the company is prepared to offer compensation for damages suffered due to their actions." He turned specifically to Eleanor. "In your case, Miss Keller, the company will provide funds equivalent to the value of your original cabin, plus additional compensation for the distress caused." Eleanor was stunned. She'd expected a fight, not an apology and compensation. "And what about the railroad's plans for this area?" she asked cautiously. "The planned route will still come through this county," Whitaker admitted. "But we've adjusted the surveys to avoid your property entirely, Miss Keller. Your land is safe from any future railroad development." Sheriff Morgan spoke up. "As for the Hargroves, I've got warrants for their arrest on charges of arson, attempted murder, and a half-dozen other crimes. My deputies are looking for them now." Gabriel's posture relaxed slightly, though he remained vigilant. "The Hargroves won't take this lying down. They've gotten away with too much for too long to simply surrender. Which is why I'll be keeping men stationed in this area until they're apprehended," Morgan assured them. "And I'd appreciate your cooperation, West. Your men know this country as well as anyone." "You'll have it," Gabriel promised. After discussing the details further, Whitaker presented Eleanor with a bank draft for a sum that left her momentarily speechless. It was more money than she'd ever possessed at one time, enough to make her new cabin truly comfortable and secure her future. As the visitors prepared to leave, Whitaker paused beside his horse. "Miss Keller, I hope this goes some way toward making amends for what you've endured. The Northern Pacific values good relations with the communities we serve. What the Hargroves did in our name was inexcusable." Eleanor nodded, still trying to process the unexpected turn of events. "Thank you, Mr. Whitaker. This is more than I expected." After the visitors departed, Eleanor and Gabriel stood together on the porch of her new cabin, the bank draft still clutched in her hand. "Well," Gabriel said with a hint of wonder in his voice, "that wasn't how I expected this to be resolved." Eleanor laughed, the sound bubbling up from a place of pure relief. "Nor I. I've spent weeks preparing for a fight, and instead I'm handed enough money to buy a dozen cabins." Gabriel smiled down at her, taking her free hand in his. "You deserve it, after everything you've been through." Eleanor gazed up at him, suddenly serious. "None of this would have happened without you, Gabriel. You said we'll build another when all I could see was ashes, and you made it happen." She squeezed his hand. "I don't know how to thank you for that." "You don't need to thank me," Gabriel replied softly. "Seeing you stand your ground, refuse to be intimidated, that's been reward enough." He paused, his blue eyes searching hers. "But now that the immediate danger seems to be passing, we should talk about us." Eleanor's heart quickened. "Yes, we should." Gabriel led her to the porch swing he'd built just days before, and they sat together, facing the vista of mountains and forest that had first drawn Eleanor to this piece of land. "Last night," Gabriel began carefully, "I told you I was falling in love with you. That hasn't changed with the light of day, if anything. It's only grown stronger." He took both her hands in his. "But I know how much your independence means to you. The last thing I want is for you to feel that loving me means giving up the freedom you've fought so hard to secure." Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes at his understanding. Most men would have seen her need for independence as a challenge to overcome, not a fundamental part of her to be respected. "Gabriel," she said softly, "when I came west, I thought freedom meant standing alone, answering to no one. But these past weeks have taught me something important." She looked into his eyes, letting him see the depth of her feelings. "True freedom isn't about being alone, it's about choosing who you stand beside. And I choose you if you'll have me." The joy that spread across Gabriel's face was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. "Eleanor Keller," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "I would be honored to stand beside you for as long as you'll allow." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small object that caught the morning light, a simple gold ring with a single small diamond. "I've been carrying this for days," he admitted, "waiting for the right moment, wondering if it would ever come." He held it out to her. "Will you marry me, Eleanor? Not to change who you are or limit your freedom, but to build a life together where we're both stronger for the other's presence." Eleanor looked at the ring, then at the man holding it, this good, steady man who had stood by her through destruction and rebuilding, who understood her in ways she'd never expected to be understood. The answer came without hesitation. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, Gabriel, I will marry you." His smile could have lit the darkest night as he slipped the ring onto her finger. Then he gathered her close, his kiss a promise of all they would build together in the years to come. Later that afternoon, they rode to Clara's cabin to share the news. Gabriel's sister took one look at their joined hands and Eleanor's ring and let out a whoop of joy that surely carried across the valley. "It's about time," Clara exclaimed, embracing them both. "I've been watching you two dance around each other for weeks, both too stubborn to admit what was happening." "It wasn't stubbornness," Eleanor protested, laughing. "It was caution." Clara snorted. "Call it what you will, but I've never seen my brother look at anyone the way he looks at you, and I've never seen him happier than he is right now." Gabriel's arm tightened around Eleanor's waist. "That's because I've never been happier," he said simply. They spent the evening planning their future. Eleanor would keep her land and cabin. It was important to both of them that she maintain that independence, but they would split their time between their and Gabriel's ranch, which was large enough to require his regular presence. "And the Hargroves?" Clara asked, voicing the concern they all still held. Sheriff Morgan's men will find them, Gabriel assured her. And with the railroad withdrawing support, they've lost their main protection. Their days of terrorizing this county are numbered. As if his words had summoned them, the sound of approaching riders broke the evening calm. Gabriel was on his feet instantly, rifle in hand, moving to the window with the practiced caution of a man who had lived too long in wild country. "It's Morgan," he reported, relaxing slightly, "and he's got company." They went outside to meet the sheriff, who dismounted with a satisfied expression. Behind him, 3 men sat on horses, their hands bound, their faces bruised and sullen. The Hargrove brothers. "Caught them trying to flee the territory," Morgan announced. "Thought you might like to know they're headed for a long stay behind bars." The eldest Hargrove, Harlan, glared at Eleanor with undisguised hatred. "This ain't over, Keller," he spat. "You think you've won, but that's enough out of you," Morgan interrupted sharply, cuffing the back of Hargrove's head. "You're facing charges that could see you hang. I'd be more concerned with that if I were you." Eleanor stepped forward, Gabriel's hand supportive at her back. She looked at the Hargroves, these men who had burned her home, tried to kill her, threatened everything she'd worked for, and found that her fear had been replaced by something else. Pity. "It is over," she said calmly. "You burned my cabin down, but we built another, stronger than before. You tried to drive me away, but instead I found something worth staying for." She glanced up at Gabriel, drawing strength from his presence. "In the end, you've lost everything, while I've gained more than I ever dreamed possible." Harlan Hargrove had no response, his face contorted with the impotent rage of a bully who finally faces consequences. Sheriff Morgan nodded to Gabriel and Eleanor before remounting and leading his prisoners away, back to town and the justice that awaited them. As they watched the riders disappear into the gathering dusk, Gabriel slipped his arm around Eleanor's shoulders. "You're remarkable," he said softly, facing them without flinching, even after everything they did. Eleanor leaned into his embrace. "It's easier to be brave when you're not alone." That night, as they rode back to Eleanor's cabin under a sky blazing with stars, a sense of peace settled over her that she hadn't felt since before the fire. The future stretched before them, full of promise and possibility, a future they would build together, just as they had built her cabin from the ashes of destruction. "What are you thinking?" Gabriel asked as they approached the clearing, the cabin's windows glowing with the lamplight Clara's hired girl had left burning for their return. Eleanor smiled up at him, her heart full. "I'm thinking that when those men burned my cabin down, it seemed like the worst thing that could happen." She reached for his hand. "I never imagined it would lead me to the best thing that ever happened." Gabriel brought her hand to his lips. "Sometimes the worst moments lead us exactly where we need to be," he said. "And I'm exactly where I need to be, right here with you." As they dismounted and walked hand in hand toward the cabin that symbolized both their resilience and their love, Eleanor knew with absolute certainty that whatever challenges the future might hold, they would face them together, building, rebuilding, creating a life as strong and enduring as the home they had raised from ashes. The wedding took place 3 weeks later, on a crisp autumn day when the aspen trees blazed gold against the evergreens. They held the ceremony on Eleanor's property, in the meadow beside her cabin, with the mountains standing witness to their vows. Clara had insisted on handling the arrangements, transforming the simple clearing into a celebration worthy of the occasion. Eleanor wore a dress of ivory silk that Clara had somehow procured from the nearest town, with wildflowers in her hair instead of a formal veil. Gabriel, clean-shaven for the occasion, looked almost uncomfortable in his new suit, but his eyes never left Eleanor as she walked toward him on the arm of Sheriff Morgan, who had agreed to give her away. The entire county seemed to have turned out for the occasion. Ranchers and townsfolk who had heard the story of the burned cabin and the couple who had defied the Hargroves' intimidation. Judge Wilson, who rode circuit through the territory, officiated the ceremony with dignified brevity, understanding that in this wild country, actions spoke louder than words. "Do you, Gabriel West, take Eleanor Keller to be your lawfully wedded wife?" the judge asked, his voice carrying across the gathered assembly. Gabriel's blue eyes held Eleanor's with unwavering certainty. "I do," he said clearly. "And do you, Eleanor Keller, take Gabriel West to be your lawfully wedded husband?" Eleanor smiled up at the man who had come to her aid when all seemed lost, who had understood her need for independence even as he offered her partnership. "I do," she replied, her voice steady with conviction. "Then by the authority vested in me by the territory of Montana, I pronounce you husband and wife." The judge nodded to Gabriel. "You may kiss your bride." Gabriel gently cupped Eleanor's face in his hands, as if she were the most precious thing he'd ever held. "I love you," he whispered, for her ears alone, before pressing his lips to hers as the assembled guests erupted in cheers. The celebration that followed lasted well into the night. Tables were set up in the clearing, laden with food contributed by neighbors from miles around. A fiddler played lively tunes while people danced on the packed earth, their joy a defiant answer to the violence that had brought Eleanor and Gabriel together. As evening fell, lanterns were lit around the perimeter of the clearing, creating a warm glow that held back the gathering darkness. Eleanor and Gabriel danced together under the stars, moving in perfect harmony despite having never formally danced together before. "Happy, Mrs. West?" Gabriel murmured as he held her close. Eleanor smiled up at him, her heart full. "Happier than I ever imagined possible," she admitted. "And you, Mr. West? Any regrets about marrying a stubborn woman who insists on keeping her own cabin?" Gabriel laughed, the sound rich and warm in the cool night air. "Only that I didn't find you sooner." His expression grew more serious. "Your independence is part of who you are, Eleanor. I would never want to change that." As the celebration continued around them, Gabriel led Eleanor away from the crowd, toward the edge of the clearing where they could see both her cabin and the vast expanse of star-filled sky above the mountains. "I have something for you," he said, reaching into his pocket. He withdrew a folded document and handed it to her. Eleanor opened it curiously, struggling to read in the dim light. When she realized what she was holding, she looked up at Gabriel in shock. "This is a deed," she said. "To your ranch." Gabriel nodded. "Half of it, to be precise. I had the papers drawn up last week. The Circle W is as much yours now as mine legally and in every other way." Eleanor was momentarily speechless. Gabriel had just given her half ownership of one of the largest cattle operations in the county, a property worth many times her own homestead. "Gabriel," she finally managed, "this is too much. The ranch is your life's work, your legacy. And now it's our legacy," he interrupted gently, "just as your homestead is. Two properties, joined like their owners, each with its own character but part of the same whole." He took her hands in his. "I don't want there to be mine and yours between us, Eleanor. Only ours." Tears welled in Eleanor's eyes at the profound understanding this gesture represented. Gabriel wasn't asking her to give up her independence or her homestead. Instead, he was making himself equally vulnerable, sharing everything he had built. "Thank you," she whispered, standing on tiptoe to kiss him. "I'll try to be worthy of such trust." "You already are," Gabriel assured her, holding her close as the stars wheeled overhead and the sounds of celebration continued in the background. The Hargrove's trial was held the following month in the county seat, a 2-day affair that ended with all three brothers sentenced to 15 years in the territorial prison for arson, attempted murder, and a litany of other crimes that came to light during the proceedings. Eleanor testified about the burning of her cabin and the subsequent shooting, her testimony strengthened by Gabriel's corroboration and that of his ranch hands. Other victims of the Hargroves' intimidation came forward as well, emboldened by Eleanor's example. By the time the judge delivered his sentence, it was clear that the Hargroves' reign of terror in the county was well and truly over. Justice was a long time coming, Sheriff Morgan commented as he, Eleanor, and Gabriel left the courthouse after the sentencing. But it came at last. Thanks in part to you, Gabriel acknowledged, shaking the lawman's hand. Your persistence made this possible. Morgan shrugged. Just doing my job. About time, some would say. He looked at Eleanor with respect. It took someone willing to stand their ground to finally bring those jackals down. Most folks just cut their losses and moved on when the Hargroves came calling. Not everyone has somewhere else to go, Eleanor replied simply, or someone to help them rebuild when everything is lost. As winter descended on the territory, Eleanor and Gabriel settled into the rhythm of their new life together. As they had planned, they divided their time between the Circle W Ranch and Eleanor's homestead, which they now called Aspen Ridge for the grove of trees that surrounded it. The money from the railroad's compensation allowed Eleanor to make improvements to her property: a larger barn, better fencing, even a small greenhouse where she could grow vegetables during the harsh Montana winters. Gabriel, true to his promise, never suggested she give up her land or her independence, instead finding ways to integrate their separate properties into a cohesive operation. In December, with snow blanketing the landscape and turning the world into a glittering wonderland, they celebrated their first Christmas together. Clara joined them at Aspen Ridge, bringing gifts and holiday cheer from town. They decorated the cabin with pine boughs and red berries, and Gabriel surprised Eleanor with a piano, a luxury she had never imagined owning, delivered at great expense and effort from Helena. My mother played, Eleanor explained as she ran her fingers over the keys, tears in her eyes at the thoughtful gift. She taught me when I was young, but I haven't had access to an instrument in years. Now you do, Gabriel said simply, pleased by her obvious joy. That evening, with snow falling gently outside and a fire crackling in the hearth, Eleanor played Christmas carols while Gabriel and Clara sang along, their voices blending in the warm, intimate space of the cabin. Looking around at the home they had built together, literally and figuratively, Eleanor felt a contentment that went bone deep. Later, after Clara had retired to the small guest room they had added onto the cabin, Eleanor and Gabriel sat together by the fire, wrapped in a shared blanket. I have a Christmas gift for you too, Eleanor said softly, taking Gabriel's hand and placing it gently on her stomach. One that won't arrive for several months yet. Gabriel's eyes widened as he understood her meaning, joy spreading across his face like sunrise. A baby? You're certain? Eleanor nodded, her own happiness mirrored in his expression. Dr. Hansen confirmed it yesterday when we were in town. He thinks sometime in early summer. Gabriel gathered her close, his touch gentle as if she had suddenly become fragile. Eleanor, he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. I never thought. That is, I hoped, but... I know, she said, understanding his speechlessness. Both of them had lived solitary lives for so long that the creation of a new family seemed almost miraculous. It seems we're building more than just cabins together. Gabriel laughed, the sound full of wonder. Indeed we are. He placed his hand on her still flat abdomen again, marveling. A child. Our child. As they sat together in the cabin they had built from ashes, planning for a future neither had dared imagine before finding each other, Eleanor reflected on the strange path that had led her here. The destruction of her first home had seemed like an ending, but it had merely been the beginning of a far greater story, one of resilience, partnership, and a love strong enough to withstand whatever challenges might come. The baby, a boy they named Thomas Jenkins West in honor of both Clara's late husband and Gabriel's mentor, was born in June of 1879, on a perfect summer day when wildflowers carpeted the meadows around Aspen Ridge. Dr. Hansen pronounced him healthy and strong, with Gabriel's blue eyes and Eleanor's determined chin. "He's perfect," Gabriel whispered as he held his son for the first time, awe and terror mingling in his expression. Eleanor watched them from her bed, exhausted but filled with a happiness so complete it seemed almost unreal. "He is," she agreed. "And so is this life we've built together." As Thomas grew from infant to toddler, it became clear that he had inherited both his parents' strength of will and love of the land. He took his first steps on the porch of the Aspen Ridge cabin, his first pony ride on the grounds of the Circle W, and was equally at home in both places just as his parents were. By his second birthday, Thomas had a sister on the way. Clara Rose West arrived in the winter of 1881, during a blizzard so fierce that Dr. Hansen couldn't make it from town. Gabriel delivered his daughter himself, with Clara's assistance and Eleanor's extraordinary courage. "Another perfect West," Clara pronounced as she placed the swaddled infant in Gabriel's trembling hands. "You two certainly know how to make beautiful children." Gabriel could only nod, overcome with emotion as he placed his daughter in Eleanor's waiting arms. "She looks like you," he said, brushing Eleanor's hair back from her forehead. "Poor child," Eleanor joked weakly, though her eyes shone with love as she gazed at her daughter's tiny face. As their family grew, so did their operations. The railroad that had once threatened Eleanor's homestead eventually brought prosperity to the region, making it easier to get cattle to market and supplies from the east. Gabriel expanded the Circle W, while Eleanor developed Aspen Ridge into a successful horse breeding operation, gaining a reputation for producing some of the finest stock in the territory. They faced challenges, of course, harsh winters, drought summers, the normal difficulties of raising children and running businesses in a territory still being tamed. But they faced them together, their partnership growing stronger with each obstacle overcome. In the summer of 1885, 7 years after they had first met over the smoking ruins of Eleanor's original cabin, they held a gathering at Aspen Ridge to celebrate both their anniversary and the completion of a new, larger home adjacent to the cabin Gabriel had built for Eleanor after the fire. "We're keeping the cabin too," Eleanor had insisted when they began planning the larger house. "It's where we began," Gabriel had readily agreed. "It's part of our history. Besides, it'll make a fine guest house for Clara when she visits." The celebration brought together friends and neighbors from across the county, many of the same people who had attended their wedding years before, plus new arrivals to the growing community. 6-year-old Thomas and 4-year-old Clara Rose raced around with the other children, their laughter carrying across the meadow that had seen so many significant moments in their parents' lives. As evening approached, Gabriel found Eleanor standing on the porch of the original cabin, looking out at the gathering with a contented expression. "Penny for your thoughts, Mrs. West," he said, coming to stand beside her. Eleanor smiled up at him, the years having added character to her beauty but diminished nothing of her spirit. "I was just thinking about the day we met," she replied, leaning into his embrace. "When you rode up and found me standing over what was left of my first cabin." Gabriel nodded, his arm tightening around her waist. "I remember it well. You had a rifle pointed at me and looked ready to use it." "I might have," Eleanor admitted with a laugh. "I wasn't in a trusting mood that day." "Can't blame you for that," Gabriel said, his voice softening as he recalled the devastation he'd encountered. "You'd lost everything." "Not everything," Eleanor corrected, turning to face him fully. "I still had my land, my determination. And then I found something I didn't even know I was missing." She reached up to touch his face, her fingers tracing the lines that 7 years of Montana sun and wind had etched around his eyes. "You said we'll build another, and we did. Not just a cabin, but a life, family, a future." Gabriel turned his head to kiss her palm, a gesture that had become familiar over the years, but had lost none of its tenderness. "Best thing I ever built," he said simply. From the meadow, Thomas's voice called out, summoning them to join the festivities. Eleanor and Gabriel exchanged a smile before walking hand in hand toward their family, friends, and the life they had created together, a life as strong and enduring as the cabin they had raised from ashes on that fateful day when everything had seemed lost, but had actually just begun. As they joined their children in the gathering dusk, Eleanor glanced back at the cabin that had been their beginning. It stood solid and welcoming in the golden evening light, a testament to resilience, to partnership, and to the power of those 4 simple words that had changed everything. "We'll build another." And they had, together,